The room wasn't built for peace. Stage lights buzzed above a round table dressed in liberal blues and conservative reds, but tonight, ideology took a back seat to tension. The audience inside MSNBC's newly launched special, Voices of the Nation, didn't blink. They weren't here for unity, they came to see fire. And in the center sat two voices who never whispered. Denzel Washington leaned back in his chair, unshaken. Calm. Like a lion conserving energy. His tailored charcoal suit was understated but commanded respect. He didn't come to perform. He came to speak truth. Opposite him sat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC. Passion burning beneath every syllable, her blazer sharp, her tone sharper. She was America's progressive sparkplug. And tonight, she looked ready to explode. "You say we need to center families," AOC began, eyebrows tight. "But when I speak of women raising kids alone, when I call out systemic inequalities, you say I'm blaming men." Denzel's head tilted ever so slightly. Then he spoke, deep and slow, like thunder warning before the storm. "No," he said. "I'm saying you're erasing them." The crowd stirred. A few gasps. A louder whisper rippled through the studio like heat rising from asphalt. Denzel kept going. "I came from a home where my father taught me what a backbone was. He worked 2 jobs, didn't sleep, didn't complain. And I've seen too many conversations where his presence, his sacrifice, is completely ignored because it doesn't fit the political narrative." AOC shot forward. "Are you saying we should center men in every policy? In every protest? When millions of women are still clawing for equality?" Denzel's eyes didn't flinch. "I'm saying if your movement forgets fathers, then it forgets half of the story. And half a story ain't justice, it's propaganda." Boom. The crowd froze. Even the cameraman's breath seemed to catch. AOC narrowed her gaze. "So what? You want us to just thank absentee fathers now too? Ignore decades of abandonment in our communities?" Denzel leaned forward for the first time, voice like tempered steel. "No. But don't pretend every man ran. Some stayed. Some bled. And I won't let their silence be rewritten as absence just because it's easier to sell victimhood than resilience." The silence afterward was deafening. And that was just the beginning. The silence didn't last long. From the back of the studio, a lone clap echoed. Then another. Then a thunder of divided applause, like the very crowd was split into 2 Americas, one nodding at Denzel, the other clenching fists behind AOC's every word. AOC didn't blink. "I'm tired of this Hollywood martyrdom," she snapped. "You act like standing up for women somehow drags men down. That's not feminism. That's fear talking." Denzel sat still, hands folded. But his next words cut like wire. "No, that's accountability. You want to empower women? Great. But don't do it by making fatherhood some punchline on late-night TV. Don't do it by pretending strength is exclusive to struggle." AOC's face stiffened. Her voice, sharp and surgical, returned fire. "You speak of fatherhood like it's a cure. But some of us grew up with bruises instead of bedtime stories. Fathers who weren't heroes. Fathers who broke more than they built." Denzel nodded slowly. "And I mourn that with you. But don't build a movement on exceptions. Build it on truth. The truth is, you don't fix communities by subtracting men. You fix them by demanding better from them, and giving them a place to rise into." The moderator tried to step in, "Let's take a breath, maybe bring in some audience questions," but neither of them yielded. AOC leaned forward now, elbows firm on the table. "You want a place to rise? Rise then. But don't expect applause just for showing up. And don't tell me my politics are broken just because they don't center your nostalgia." The camera zoomed in on Denzel's face. Still calm. Still calculating. It's not nostalgia, he said. It's memory. And memory teaches us what worked. The strongest movements I've ever seen didn't scream over men, they stood beside them. Audience murmurs. A woman near the front visibly shook her head. A man beside her clapped once, hard. Suddenly, this wasn't just a debate. It was a line in the sand. Behind the cameras, producers whispered into earpieces. Social media managers fired off clips already going viral. Twitter was lighting up. So was Truth Social. This wasn't a panel, it was a cultural earthquake. AOC caught her breath, scanning the crowd, then turning back to Denzel. "Be careful," she said. "Sometimes the people clapping the loudest for you are the ones you'd never want behind you when the real fight starts." Denzel just smirked. "I've been in the fight long before the cameras turned on. And I don't need applause, I need the truth to hurt the right people." Cut to black, the commercial break was supposed to cool things down. It didn't. When the cameras returned, you could practically feel the heat radiating off the table. The audience had stopped pretending to be neutral. Half were leaning forward, lips tight, nodding every time Denzel spoke. The other half clutched their arms across their chests, eyes flaring each time AOC fired back. This wasn't a panel anymore. It was war with microphones. The moderator tried again. "Let's get back to solutions." But Denzel leaned in, voice low and deliberate. "You know what the solution is? Stop selling brokenness as identity. I walk into classrooms, into prisons, into communities where the only role model boys see is a rapper or a hustler. You think they chose that? No. They inherited a silence." AOC cut him off. "That's exactly why we need policy, reparations, investment, education reform." Denzel raised a brow. "And fathers." The crowd reacted instantly. Some clapped. Some booed. One person yelled, "You're ignoring reality." Another shouted, "Let him speak." AOC wasn't backing down. "You want to legislate fatherhood now?" she shot. "You can't file a bill for morality." Denzel's voice didn't rise, but it carried. Every syllable hit like a drum. "No, but you can stop mocking it. Stop making men feel disposable in the name of progress. If you tell a generation of boys they're either toxic or useless, don't act surprised when they disappear." The silence was heavier this time. Then AOC hit back with precision. "You speak like masculinity is under attack. Maybe what's under attack is unchecked power. Maybe it's time men stop confusing accountability with persecution." Denzel's smirk returned. That calm fury. "I have no problem with accountability. I've lived it. But don't weaponize it to rewrite history. My father wasn't perfect, but he was there. And every time you erase men like him to fit your script, you don't sound progressive. You sound selective." The moderator gave up. This wasn't his show anymore. Cameras zoomed in. Twitter was melting. Clips were already captioned. Denzel slams AOC over fatherhood debate. "AOC, we don't owe men a platform. Truth versus politics, who's really winning?" And still, neither blinked. AOC sat upright. "Your truth may comfort you, Denzel. But millions of women walk into courtrooms, into hospitals, into history, alone. Don't pretend your experience makes theirs invisible." He nodded. Slowly. "But don't pretend one kind of pain gets to define the conversation. If you build a future where fathers aren't welcome, don't be surprised when nobody shows up." The crowd didn't know whether to stand or stay seated. But one thing was clear, America was watching. And no one was changing the channel. Denzel took a breath. But it wasn't to calm down. It was to focus. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes locked on AOC. No blink. No smile. You say women walk into courtrooms alone. I believe you. But I've seen men dragged into those same rooms, treated guilty before proven anything, just for existing. Just for being fathers. AOC narrowed her eyes. Don't you dare equate being held accountable with being oppressed. We fight for our safety. You fight for your ego. That line stung. The crowd gasped, half stunned by her punch, half bracing for Denzel's. And it came fast. I fight for sons who grow up thinking they're villains by birth, Denzel said. I fight for fathers who never had a hashtag. Who raised kids, paid bills, and still got called irrelevant by people too busy drafting speeches to visit a community center. AOC fired back, voice rising. Speeches? You're the one giving TED Talks on masculinity while women are bleeding in the streets. You think your experience gives you a monopoly on truth? Denzel's tone never wavered. That's what made it hit harder. I don't want a monopoly. I want a mirror. And if you can't stand what you see when someone holds one up, maybe it's not the reflection that's broken. The studio was dead silent. You could hear the lights buzz above them. AOC leaned back, stunned for half a beat, but only half. Then her voice came back, this time quieter, sharper. You talk about broken reflections, but who built the glass? You act like fathers were erased. No. They walked away. They hurt us. They were never there. Denzel looked like he'd been waiting for that line. He responded slowly, deliberately. And yet, here I am. And you're still talking to me. Maybe because, deep down, we both know the only way forward is to rebuild what was shattered, not pretend it never existed. From the audience, a woman shouted, "Say that again." Another voice followed, "Let her speak." But Denzel and AOC weren't battling for the room anymore. They were battling for America's conscience. This wasn't just ideology. This was two worldviews colliding like tectonic plates. Producers whispered nervously behind the scenes. Network execs were already deciding how to spin the clips. But on the stage, it was just two people, armed with lived truths and scars. AOC straightened her papers like blades. You want a mirror, Denzel? Fine. Look into mine. See the women who fought their way to college, to Congress, to sanity, without applause, without protection, and often without fathers. Denzel nodded. Respectfully. I do see them. And I honor them. But the next generation? They deserve both parents. They deserve a country that doesn't feed them narratives but gives them roots. The audience didn't know whether to clap or cry. But they listened. And that, in this moment, was more powerful than any applause. AOC pressed her palms flat on the table. Her eyes, sharpened by years of debate and activism, didn't flinch. You keep saying, fathers, Denzel, as if the world would be saved if men just showed up. But what you forget is that some of us didn't wait for them. We built ourselves. We broke the cycle. Denzel didn't argue immediately. He let her words hang in the air like smoke after gunfire, visible, heavy, undeniable. Then, he nodded. I respect what you built, Congresswoman. But ask yourself, why did you have to build it alone? Why did an entire generation of women have to become both mother and father? You didn't break the cycle. You survived it. That line cracked something in the room. A few gasps. One audible, damn. AOC leaned back, folding her arms tightly, as if bracing herself. You think survival isn't victory? I think survival is step one, Denzel replied. Victory is when our kids don't have to survive what we did. The camera cut to the audience. Some were nodding. Others visibly tense, torn between ideologies colliding live. Then AOC did something unexpected. She laughed. Not with humor, but with exhaustion. You sound like a man nostalgic for a time that never loved us. You want balance, but on your terms. You want credit for standing beside us when it was never equal to begin with. Denzel's jaw tensed. No. I want repair. I want men to stop being afraid of responsibility. I want women to stop believing that protecting their pain requires erasing our presence. A pause. Then he added, voice lower. You can't preach progress if your revolution forgets the fathers. The room froze. Even the host, usually quick to steer the show, didn't dare interrupt. AOC's voice came back quieter, but colder. And what about the fathers who used their presence as power? Who called it leadership when it was just control? Denzel stood. Only halfway. Hands still resting on the table, but his posture was rising. That's not fatherhood. That's fear dressed as masculinity. And I've spent my life standing against that kind of man. The crowd erupted. Not in applause. In murmurs. Whispers. Shifting chairs. Everyone could feel it, this wasn't a debate anymore. This was two wounded sides trying to decide whether to fight or finally face the damage together. AOC took a breath. Her hand, slightly shaking, reached for her water. But she didn't drink. You know what scares me most, Denzel, she said, voice thin but sharp. That someday, we'll teach young girls to fear boys, and teach boys to fear themselves. Denzel's reply came like a closing gavel. Then let's change the lesson. Together. Silence. Powerful. Unrelenting. And just like that, the moment shifted from heat to weight. This wasn't about scoring points anymore. It was about rewriting a chapter in America's moral memory. Before either of them could speak again, the studio lights flickered, not technically, but emotionally. The air shifted. And then a voice boomed through the satellite screen behind them. It was Van Jones, joining via live feed. Excuse me, he said, leaning forward from a remote CNN studio, but if I could interrupt. AOC glanced at the screen, startled. Denzel didn't flinch. Van continued, voice low but commanding. I've been listening for the past 20 minutes. And while I admire both of you for showing up, I have to ask, is this the unity you promised us? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like a custody battle over a broken house no one wants to rebuild. That line landed hard. AOC's jaw clenched. Denzel exhaled slowly, not in defeat, but recalibration. Van leaned in closer. We keep talking about fathers, mothers, who built what, who didn't show up, but let me ask this, where are we going? If the next generation is watching this, what are they learning? Denzel responded first. They're learning that the pain matters. That someone is finally calling it out loud. Van shook his head. No. They're learning that the pain still owns us. AOC cut in sharply. So what? We sweep it under the rug for the sake of looking united? That's not healing, that's silence. Van didn't blink. I'm saying maybe the fire you both carry, maybe it needs direction. Because right now, it's just burning bridges we haven't even crossed yet. That silenced the stage. The crowd, now hanging on every word, barely breathed. Then Denzel turned, not away from the conversation, but toward the screen. You're right, Van, he said. But there's no direction without truth. And truth is messy. Painful. Loud. That's what this is. AOC nodded, reluctantly. But it doesn't mean we stop showing up. Van gave a slow nod, then his voice softened. Then show up for each other, too. Not just for your points. The screen went black. The host, finally finding their voice, leaned forward. Well, I don't think anyone expected that. The tension hadn't vanished. It had deepened. Denzel looked at AOC. For the first time, she didn't meet his eyes in defiance, but in contemplation. Something had shifted. Not peace, but recognition. And recognition is where change begins. As the tension settled like smoke after a fire, a woman in the audience slowly stood up. Her voice didn't ask permission. It demanded space. "I'm sorry, but I have to say something." Cameras shifted. Eyes turned. The producers scrambled, but it was too late. The room had already given her the floor. She looked to be in her early 40s. Simple blazer. No political button. Just fury in her throat and a tremble in her hands. "You say unity," she began, pointing directly at the stage, "but you don't mean me." "Not really." AOC straightened in her seat. Denzel turned toward her, eyebrows slightly raised. The woman's voice cracked, but didn't falter. "I've got 2 boys. One's black. One's half Latino. You think I don't know what it feels like to explain why their fathers aren't here? You think I haven't felt invisible every time someone like you," her eyes cut to AOC, "uses their pain like it's part of a campaign slogan?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. But she wasn't done. "And you," she turned to Denzel, "you speak truth. I felt it. But what happens when your truth turns into a wall? I'm tired of walls. I want bridges. But every time we get close, the fire starts again." Silence. AOC stood up slowly. Her voice was measured, but her eyes were glassy. "What's your name?" she asked. "Renee," the woman replied. "Renee, you're right. It wasn't an act." There was no applause line in her tone. No political spin. Just a woman responding to another woman's exhaustion. Denzel stood next. "I think we've all forgotten that pain isn't a podium," he said, scanning the audience. "It's a mirror. And sometimes, it shows us things we haven't admitted, even to ourselves." Renee sat down slowly, wiping a tear. Not in defeat, but in release. The audience didn't clap. Not because it wasn't powerful, but because something sacred had just happened. And applause would have cheapened it. The host leaned in. This is not the show we planned tonight." AOC gave a tired smile. "Maybe it's the one we needed." Denzel nodded. For the first time that night, he wasn't pushing back. He was holding space. The air was still thick from Renee's emotional confrontation. Producers whispered through earpieces, trying to regain control. But just as the host was about to pivot the conversation, a new voice echoed across the studio, young, confident, and razor-sharp. "I have something to say." Everyone turned. A teenager, maybe 16, was standing near the third row, holding a handheld mic passed to him by a floor manager. He wore a plain hoodie, his curls slightly messy, but his eyes were laser-focused. "I've watched this entire conversation unfold like it was about all of you. Your egos. Your parties. Your history. But what about us? The ones inheriting this broken country?" The question didn't land, it detonated. Denzel leaned forward, intrigued. AOC looked over, arms crossed, studying him. "I go to a public school where the heat doesn't work in winter," the boy continued. "My mom works 2 jobs. My older brother got shot last year, wrong place, wrong time. No one came to our block. No press conference. No justice. You could hear people shift in their seats. This wasn't a headline, it was a wound walking upright. And you know what I hear from politicians like you, Congresswoman," he said, locking eyes with AOC. "I hear promises. Big words. Hope and change. But out where I live, hope's got a curfew. AOC blinked, visibly shaken. Then he turned to Denzel. And Mr. Washington. I respect you. You speak truth, yeah. But sometimes truth from the mountaintop don't reach the street corner. We don't need a speech. We need a strategy. Denzel's face went still. Like someone had walked into his home and rearranged the furniture of his thoughts. The teen stepped forward as the host gestured to bring him up on stage. What's your name? Denzel asked, voice low. Malik. And what do you want, Malik? Malik didn't flinch. I want you to stop talking like we're symbols. I want you to listen. Really listen. Because this isn't just a debate for you, it's survival for us. The room was dead silent. AOC turned to the host. Let him sit with us. Producers hesitated, but gave in. A chair was added. Malik took his seat between two of America's most recognizable figures. The power dynamic had shifted. The adult voices had filled the room all night. Now, the kid was in control. Malik sat between AOC and Denzel like a matchstick between two torches. His presence didn't shrink in their shadow, it sharpened them. Cameras zoomed in on his calm, unflinching face. Twitter was already ablaze. A new headline started trending, "The boy who stole the stage." Then, just when the momentum felt at its peak, the host touched her earpiece and froze. "We've got a live call coming in," she said, eyes darting to the director's booth. "It's from the White House." A tremor ran through the room. AOC's expression stiffened. Denzel exhaled slowly. Malik? He didn't blink. On the monitor behind them, the presidential seal appeared. Then the screen shifted, to a direct feed. It wasn't the president himself, but a senior White House advisor, known more for damage control than policy. "We've been watching the discussion," she said, voice polished and political. "And let me say first, we appreciate the passion from the panel tonight." Denzel leaned forward. "Appreciate the passion? That's what you got from all this?" The advisor's smile tightened. "Mr. Washington, I'd caution you." "No, you listen," Denzel snapped. "A kid just broke through your echo chamber with truth. And instead of acting, you send in a talking head to mop up the optics?" Malik stood up. "Ma'am, do you even know what the bus schedule is like in my neighborhood?" The advisor faltered. "I'm not sure that's relevant to." "It's everything," Malik said. "You talk infrastructure, but we talk survival. Your policies are PowerPoints. Ours are funerals." The screen went silent. Then the advisor muttered, "We'll have someone reach out." Denzel shook his head. "You don't get it. We are someone." The call ended abruptly. The studio burst into spontaneous applause, not out of celebration, but sheer emotional overflow. AOC turned to Malik. "That was brave." Malik replied without hesitation, "That was necessary." The host looked out at the audience, visibly moved. Tonight's program was supposed to be about economic policy. But something deeper happened here. America just met its mirror. Denzel rested his hand on Malik's shoulder. "This isn't the end. It's the beginning." The crowd stood. Not for Denzel. Not for AOC. But for a voice that had no lobby behind it, just truth. The night should have ended with the credits rolling. But instead, nobody moved. Even as the lights dimmed and studio staff began their routine shutdown, the energy in the room pulsed like an aftershock. Something had shifted. You could feel it. Not in words, but in the silence that followed. Denzel stepped to the edge of the stage, no longer speaking to the host, or even to AOC, but directly to the studio audience and the millions watching at home. "You want to know why we yell? Because for too long, the only language power listens to is thunder." He gestured behind him. This young man didn't just speak truth. He lit a fuse. And if tonight scared the status quo, good. Maybe it's time they stopped sleeping so well. AOC remained seated, visibly emotional. This wasn't political for her anymore, it was personal. She didn't agree with everything Denzel said, but tonight, he wasn't an actor. He was a wake-up call. Malik, standing between them, said nothing. He didn't have to. His presence now echoed across networks, across generations. His phone, left backstage, had over 30,000 unread messages. As Denzel made his way off the stage, reporters swarmed the hallway outside. One shouted, "Denzel, was this all planned?" He paused, looked the reporter dead in the eye. No script. No stunt. Just truth. And then he walked out, not with a smirk, not with flair, but like a man who had just handed the mic back to the people. The next morning, clips of the broadcast exploded online. Denzel versus the system. Who is Malik? Why the White House hung up? By noon, every major news network had rerun the exchange at least 5 times. Hashtags trended. Hashtag Malik movement. Hashtag Denzel was right. Hashtag we heard you. Petitions were launched. Malik was invited to speak at schools, summits, even Congress. People didn't just see a kid from the Bronx, they saw a crack in the ceiling. AOC released a simple statement. Last night, I sat next to 2 truths, the fire of resistance, and the future we keep failing to listen to. I'm done talking. Let's start doing. Denzel declined every interview. Every offer. Every headline. Instead, he released one sentence on his official page. This isn't my story, it's ours. Pick up the pen. Closing line, narrator voiceover style. Sometimes, the loudest revolutions don't come with flags or marches. They come when someone finally listens. And when that happens, you don't just watch history. You become it. Sometimes, the loudest revolutions don't come with flags or marches. They come when someone finally listens. And when that happens, you don't just watch history. You become it.